Hi chess friends, this is King's Executor covering round 4 of the World Chess Championship, which is being held in Chennai, India. Anand had the white pieces, opening the game with e4, and we have a Ruy Lopez on the board. And Anand-Carlsen plays the, for club players, quite boring Berlin defense, which is quite drawish for black. This is the defense which grandmasters really appreciate because it's rock solid, and we will see how the game proceeds. Kramnik played this defense in the World Championship match against Kasparov, where Kasparov wasn't able to win a single game against this defense. And because of this popular event back then, this defense became very much one of the favorite defenses for black in the Ruy Lopez. Castles here, and knight takes e4. Just dropping back, a move like d3 would very much avoid the normal main line, but okay, we have castles. Knight takes e4, d4, knight back, kicking the bishop, and white wins his pawn back now. The knight lands on f5, and because of this queen exchange, many players find this opening very boring. Now we see that black gained the bishop pair, but white argues that he has space in the center, a better pawn structure, as you can tell because of these doubled pawns, and white is basically planning to cramp black so that the bishop pair the bishop pair doesn't come to life. h3 is one of the first steps to make this plan. In the Ruy Lopez, you don't want to push your kingside pawns too quickly, or else you will find weaknesses in your camp which black can exploit. Bishop d7 was Magnus's move here, giving the king a flight square. Well, the problem often for black is how to get his rooks into the game. Rook d1 here. Well, many club players might be tempted by pushing g4 here immediately. The knight would drop back to e7, and now the diagonal is cleared for the bishop, and h5 is coming, and then we would have a undefended g-pawn because it would be attacked twice. So you already see that black is not just waiting for white to be buried. So instead, rook d1, bishop e7, knight c3 again, g4, and knight h4 this time. The knight is defended by the bishop. Maybe forces even exchanges. I mean, you don't want to really block your rook which pinned this bishop. So if you take this, you have a piece sitting on h4, stopping the pawns for the time being. Maybe h5 is coming, and yeah, it doesn't look very nice. I mean, if you exchange these pieces, the bishop pair gains of quality, and black's cramped position gets more freed in a way. So instead of g4 again, we develop a piece, king c8. So Magnus steps out of the pin, and bishop g5, exchanging the bishop pair. If f6 here, that would be a positional mistake, because however black responds, there is a lonely pawn, and that's a really bad pawn structure to have. This doubled pawn, no bishop pair to compensate, and a single pawn. So instead of that, h6 is played. And the knight on e7 looks passive, but it can come to g6 at some moment, attacking these squares and pawns, and that's a plan to slow down white's kingside advance. Rook d2, planning to get the a rook into the game. c5, clearing the way for the bishop, maybe taking away this central square from white's knight, because that knight doesn't want to stay on f3, because you want to push your pawns, for example g4 and f4, and the knight stands in the way, and this pawn move takes away an active maneuver from white. Rook a d1, bishop e6, knight e1. So the knight has to go a passive route to land on d3 maybe. Knight g6. Now, as you see, again, now white wants to advance the kingside pawns, which is one of the trumps in his position, and the other trump is white's active rooks here, and you see these dormant rooks. But practice has shown that white cannot attack black that easily. Knight g6, knight d3, and b6 was played. A correct move. If you had a reflex like playing c4 here, attacking the defender of this strong pawn in the center to grab it, then after knight c5 and something like knight takes pawn, then we have such an sequence where you again see the pawn structure is even worse for black now. The heavy pieces for white are very active, and you can just see a plan for white in moving his rook here, attacking this backward pawn, and this knight could come here, 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 attacking the pawn. And I think it takes ages for black to get the rook here out into the game, and I don't see how black can defend that g pawn. So instead of c4, we have b6 that defends the pawn and gives the king a square. Knight e2. Well, at any stage the knight can be kicked now, because c5 is not available anymore because of b6. So then the knight would have to leave, and we want a knight here to protect the f4 square to push a pawn, which then again would defend the central pawn. But there is a pawn offer which black took, b3, to try to trapping the bishop, c4 immediately to save the bishop, knight c1, the pawn was taken and the bishop was defended by doing so, pawn takes and bishop b1, so the bishop can escape. f4 now, king b7, knight c3 attacking the bishop, bishop f5, g4, and bishop c8. Let's just look at bishop e6. It's not that bad, even though you allow white to fork your pieces, but then you gain this pawn and a tempo in a way by threatening this fork. Rook e2 would be a move then, and the second pawn would be won. And after knight takes, winning the piece, black would defend his piece, king f2, and a5. And you see black has this pawn majority and won 3 pawns for the piece. And now the question is, what is more important, the connected 3 passed pawns or the white extra knight? I think that that position would be very difficult for white to handle, because pawns are easy to push and knights are not that easy to maneuver. That would be an alternative. For the time being, the engine would evaluate this position as equal, but I guess that black is for choice. So after g4 attacking the bishop, Magnus chose the safer way, bishop c8, which now looks very ridiculous. Now look at this rook. Okay, we want to push the pawns and activate this rook, but you gotta admit black's position looks very passive, but it's not as easy as that. The engine evaluates this position as slightly better for black, and that surely is based on these pawns. Knight d3, h5. So 2 moves here with the pawn, but it's a good timing because black wants to take away the white trump of this space gaining pawns. f5 and knight e7 and knight b5, putting pressure on these pawns here. The rooks can come to the file. The g-pawn is exchanged and rook h4 to activate the rook. Knight f2 defending the pawn, knight c6, and now you see there's a little bit pressure in the black camp, and a5 was played. Notice knight e5 is not possible because of takes, and now after knight c3 white is winning because he's threatening mate. There's a mating net around the black king. After king a5, well, there is no mate immediately, but there is rook b1 threatening to play pawn to b4, and king b4 doesn't help. So let's give black a move. Then we have check, kicking the king back, and this is mate. So you cannot just exchange the central pawn for this pawn here. a5, rook c4, stopping the a pawn, defending the g pawn twice. g6, again hitting at the white trump. You see the pawns are advanced, but they are not really backed up. Rook to c1, doubling on the c file. The bishop defends the knight. e6 takes, and the bishop still has to keep contact with the knight. Knight e4. Well, this position looks very active for white, but black is solid, and in the end the pawns which black has, the connected pass pawns, are now a nice trump under the surface. Check and rook f4 check. Now there would be a nice alternative here which the computer suggests, activating the rook and basically claiming a win for black, which Carlsen didn't play. Let's just look at it. It depends all on this offside passed pawn, which would decoy white's pieces and forces, and then again these pawns should be telling. So let's look at a possible line. Knight f6 attacking the rook. The rooks are exchanged. g5. And you see white centralizes and trying to keep the pawn at bay at g5. But in the end, there is a lot of pressure. If king d2 here, of course we can look at king f2 to think of keeping that pawn at bay with the king, but we can look at both alternatives. Let's look at king f2 first. Black could have then exchanged rooks here, and now we're trying to exchange pawns here basically, but black is very strong here. Decoys the king to the side and has this pawn majority, which is telling. Knight c4, keeping this pawn here. After takes, and knight c8 to d6, and even the move c5 here doesn't help. That is winning for black. Let's look at king d2 and king takes. Let's keep that pawn at bay with the piece here. Then we have the bishop defending it, and now we need the king. And the black king comes into the game and rounds up that pawn here. After moves like this, you see black should be winning. So in this position, Carlsen missed rook d8. Maybe he didn't believe it. He tried check and rook f8, maybe causing trouble now that the king is cut off this side of the board. Knight d4, and this is exchanged. And now basically this position is kind of burning out. Rook to d3 was played. Another alternative was kind of easy is this here, and basically both sides could exchange pawns here, and this is a drawish position, but the move was not takes on c8 but rook to d3, and there's basically nothing for either side. Yeah, we have some random moves here. You must notice that black cannot take this pawn because of check, king takes, and queen on d1, so g5 was played, and after some random moves we know what's coming soon. Both pawns are undefended, so g5, and now the pawns are just being exchanged, and in this position a draw was agreed on move 64. So a very tense game. We had the Spanish and the Berlin defense of the Spanish game, which is a rather drawish opening to play, and because the queens are being exchanged very early in the opening. And well, this is really a game of strategy. Let's look at such a position. You see that you have to push your kingside pawns, but really bit by bit. Maybe something like g3, king g2, f4, king f3, something like this. And you have to play slowly but steadily. And black has to play, in perfect coordination to not allow the pawns to be telling for white here. And in fact, Anand-Carlsen had a chance of winning here with rook d8, but he played rook f4 check instead. Well, it's interesting that Carlsen was the first player which had a significant edge, which could have been telling. But well, if he can achieve that with the black pieces, let's look at the next rounds when he again plays with white, and hopefully nothing with pawn to c4 in an English position. I hope you liked the video. Please comment, please like, share the video, spread the word, and subscribe to this channel. Thanks a lot. See you next time. Bye bye.